to bed.
Hey everybody, it's me, Rick Acosta, the Dodger Card Collector, coming to you with another video. Today is Friday, June 14th, and the weekend is winding down. Happy Father's Day to all of you out there who will be celebrating on Sunday, and I hope you get to spend time with your family and maybe even go to a ball game. I don't know what the weather's like where you are. I know it's beautiful out here in California. I know that the East Coast has been getting a lot of rain. So what have I been up to? What is going on? It's been a quiet week after all these card shows I've been attending, and I have picked up a card or two, which hopefully I can show in the next video or two. It's been pretty quiet, and I've been pretty patient. Probably the reason I've been patient is because of the buy from last week that featured the 50 Bowmans, including Yogi Berra. I'm trying to stay focused in finishing my 1968 set. So for that reason, I've really only been looking at 1968 cards. And I'm trying to really just try to avoid looking at other cards for now. But that also doesn't mean, and it's one thing last night when I was making, I'm sure all of you got paid today from work. You know, we get paid on the 15th and the 30th. And, you know, that's how sometimes we plan what our budget or what we're going to spend our money on cards this week. And this week was the first time where I was like going, look, if you can get a couple of cards from 68, great. If not, don't buy anything else. And also on top of that, don't go crazy trying to finish 1968, because those cards will still be there weeks, months, years from now when it's time to finish. So at one point, I thought I had a deal for a Hank Aaron, and I took too long for a 68 Hank Aaron. I took too long. And then I've been looking at Bob Gibson cards, and I think I can get it cheaper, and I keep finding it a little bit more expensive than I'd like to, so I hold off. And instead of pushing the buttons and pain and getting this thing over with, I take my time. So that's kind of been my trials and tribulations for the past week. I was saddened to hear, I know a few weeks ago I spoke to you about Bill Walton. Jerry West passed away. And I guess I mentioned in my video about Bill Walton, Jerry West was my first Lakers hero. Bill Walton was my first UCLA hero. So it's just getting to that point in my life where all of my heroes, all of my family, all of my friends, we're getting older. And Jerry West is a great player. He was a great executive. He did a lot for the game of basketball. I do have one basketball card. I've showed it once. I'm waiting to get a couple of more before I show it to you again, because I do have a story that involves Jerry West, that involves the Lakers. But I think it deserves its own show, and I'm not ready to do it yet, just because I still haven't bought a Will Chamberlain card. So I wanted to bring up Jerry West, though. Rest in peace to Jerry West, and God bless his family. I hope everything's okay going forward. So in bringing up Jerry West, and just the point of life where I am, for those of you who don't know, I grew up in the 70's, which for me was not only the best decade of collecting, it was also the best decade of baseball. And right there, half of you are laughing at me. I know it. You're like, oh, no. 50s were way better. 60s were way better. You know what? You might be right, but I wasn't around back then. And I don't think you were either. So the 70s for me was the best. And you might say, why was it the best? And for me, it was just a different era, an era that I haven't seen since. For starters, growing up, we went from teams like the Baltimore Orioles, who were a little, I'll say, on the conservative side, to all of a sudden having this Oakland A's dynasty that featured Catfish Hunter and Vida Blue and Reggie Jackson and Ken Holtzman and Joe Rudy, guys with long hair, guys with mustaches. And having an older brother, having older cousins, and they were all playing Led Zeppelin and Jethro Tull and the Rolling Stones and the Beatles. And to me, the Oakland A's kind of epitomized what the 70s were growing up. But the A's had cool uniforms. They had the yellow shirts, white pants. They had the green shirts and the white pants. And on Sundays they played all white, and they just looked great compared to the Cincinnati Reds in 1972, who looked kind of stuffy in those red and white uniforms that they played in with their last names in big letters. But that was to me the beginning of a fun era. You had the crazy Houston Astros uniforms of the mid '70s, and you had AstroTurf. And I used to think AstroTurf was cool. Looking back on it, God knows what I was thinking. But I used to really like the whole layout of Candlestick Park, Riverfront Stadium, Three River Stadium in Pittsburgh. Um, as a young boy, I was really impressed by that. And now, I prefer Dodger Stadium. I prefer Camden Yards, those type of stadiums. But the 70s were cool. We had Nolan Ryan throwing no hitters. We had the A's. And at the end of the 70s, we had the New York Yankees. And my Dodgers were always there. They made a few World Series appearances. As usual, they lost all three times they were in the World Series. We saw the end of some great careers: Willie Mays and Roberto Clemente and Henry Aaron, Al Kaline, Ernie Banks. We saw a new guard. We saw guys like Reggie Jackson, Tom Seaver, Nolan Ryan, Jim Palmer. Some of these guys got their starts in the 60s, but in the 70s, they were really taking over. Mike Schmidt, George Brett, just some great names. And I had good times watching in the 70s. There was the Saturday morning games on NBC with Kurt Gowdy and Tony Kubek. Then eventually Joe Garagiola showed up. But there was a game every Saturday morning at 10 o'clock out west. And it was always like the Orioles and the Tigers and the Yankees or the Mets. But that's okay. And I remember getting excited like if the Dodgers were on TV. The Dodgers back then showed maybe 30, 40, 50 games a year. Every time they played the Giants on the road, we'd get to see those games. We never saw home games. I did not see a home game on television for the Dodgers until the Dodgers played in the 1974 playoffs against the Pirates. That was the first time. I think the regular season, I didn't see them until I was like 12 years old in 1977. But I loved the 70s. And I loved collecting in the 70s. I was really lucky. I smile as I think about it just because I still can imagine my day of getting on my bike. I'm 8 years old, getting on my bike, riding to the 3G liquor store. I think it's still there. It's under a different name. And they sold baseball cards back then at this liquor store. And back then, we're talking 1973, you could only buy Topps baseball cards. Maybe the ice cream man might happen to have some Fleers floating around, those comic World Series cards from the early 70s. You'd see those floating around. There was a grocery store called Jack's Ranch Market that's long disappeared. They had one of those baseball card machines where you put in a nickel and you put in a nickel in the dispenser and you twist it and 5 cards would come out. And for some reason, in 1973, Jack's was still selling 1972 Topps cards. So when I was buying my first cards from 1973, I was also going to Jack's and buying cards from 1972. And I always remember my brother scolding me, "Why do you want cards from 1972?" And I remember being excited for some reason. The Expos had this first baseman named Mike Jorgensen, first baseman. And I had his card on the Expos in 1973. But I also had his 1972 card on the Mets. Eventually, he was involved in a big trade with Ken Singleton and a couple of other guys for Rusty Staub. But I remember saying, wow, I have a card from Mike Jorgensen on the Expos and on the Mets. And looking back on it, that's me saying, that's where I realized this was where the problem began, was that I got excited over things like that. But I remember we had a drugstore called Thrifty's, which is kind of like Rite Aid today, and they would sell those cello packs, which were You get like 30 baseball cards, but you get to see the cards, what card you would buy, and I would sit there looking for Dodgers. Um, and then later in we'd make our mother buy Kellogg's, and it was always, Mom, buy Kellogg's Frosted Flakes. That way we could get the 3D baseball card that was included. And somehow my brother always knew where it was, and I never did. So he always got them. Then the Hostess cards, I actually call them Twinkies. Mom started buying Twinkies, and there were 3 cards on the bottom of the box. And when she picked, I would always be, no, wait. And I would look at the box to see who was on. I'd go, buy this one. Or if you bought an individual pack of 2 Twinkies, that would come with a card. But it was a great era. You rode your bike. You didn't lock your bike. Nobody stole things back then. And there wasn't much of a... There just wasn't much... Not like today where there's 20 different sets. Back then there was one set. So you just had one selection to do. And how we never finished sets, I don't know. I think our attention span just kind of ended like when September rolled around. And the first year I collected in 1973 was the last year Topps did the individual series cards that were released like every 6 weeks. And at the time, I was so dumb and naive, I didn't realize. After a while, especially when I first started buying cards, I'd go, God, I'm starting to get all these doubles. What happened? And then I'd go back like a week or two later, all of a sudden all these new cards would show up. Be like, oh my God. Then I'd start buying more cards again. And then I'd say, all of a sudden I'm getting doubles again. What's happening? What's going on? And then a few weeks later, all of a sudden, new cards showed up. And I never figured it out till like a couple of years later, probably till like I was in my early teens. But I do remember buying 1973 Topps High Numbers. The final series, I think, was Series 6. 529 to 660. And then by 1974, everything had changed, and where all the cards were released at the same time. But we got to see the introduction of Topps Traded in 1974. I always remember my friend Keith telling me that he had a Jimmy Wynn card on the Dodgers, and I was like, what? And then he showed me the traded card that he had bought overnight, and I just thought it was phenomenal. Little did I realize that I had ended up getting those cards, and they're still not worth much, but they're still nice to have. But the 70s was the best. It was the best time to watch on TV. It was the best time to grow up watching amazing players. It was a great time collecting. And what brought, for me, all this 70s nostalgia on was I had a commenter, Elvis Fan 64. I hope he's watching. He made a comment a few, God, it's probably going on at least a month now. He said, hey, why don't you talk about some of your 70s cards? And I do realize I'm guilty of this, so I'm raising my hand, that I have a tendency of showing cards from when I wasn't born, when I wasn't alive. I think we all like to do that. And I rarely look at my 70s cards. So what I did, and this is going to be either a 2 or 3 part series. I don't know when I'll finish it just because I don't want to do all the shows consecutively. But today I'm going to show you cards. I went through my binders, believe it or not. And when I looked through my binders, today from 1970 to 1974. And I looked at every sheet, every card. And that was the first time in a while where I said, God, my sets are in very nice condition. And sometimes you forget that. And when I was looking at them, I go, these look really good. So what I'm going to do in a moment here, I'm going to turn the camera around. I'm going to show you cards from 1970 through 1974. Talk about players, talk about cards. There's going to be Hall of Famers. There's going to be players in here. Why did you pick this card? And I'm not getting really, how would I say it? I'm not going to, yeah, you might see occasions where I picked like the last card of somebody, but we're not going to sit here and just show you a bunch of Hall of Fame cards. I'm going to show you players of guys I liked. And what you're going to notice is, even I noticed it, is my evolution as a baseball fan. Because I'm going to start in 1970 and I have very little to talk about because I was only 5 years old. By the time I get to 1974, I picked 10 cards and I was only like through card 180. And I was like, oh no, boy, I might have to break this up into 2 or 3 shows because 1974, I feel I'm only telling half or a third of the story. So we're going to look at some cards. And we're just going to go from there, guys, all right? So let me turn this around for you. So we're just going to go through these cards chronologically. I think I've got about 30 cards here. I'll tell you a little about the cards and why I picked them. And like I said, 1970, I wasn't watching baseball. My brother was watching baseball. I remember him watching the 1970 World Series. And the Baltimore Orioles were the big team on campus back then. And they had Brooks and Frank Robinson. And my brother was obsessed with the Orioles. I remember that's all he talked about till like 74, 1975, were the Baltimore Orioles. He did not like the Dodgers. He was more of an Orioles fan. And back then he tended to like teams that were winners. And the Orioles were a damn good team. So I featured my 1970 Brooks Robinson and Frank Robinson card here. 1970s, I always say, it's not that nice of a set. But when I was looking at them earlier, when I was going through my binders, I went, oh, these are nice. And now here's Rico Cardi. And he would win the batting championship that year. And the reason I honestly picked this card was because I remember listening to my older cousins and my brother talk about this guy's batting stance. Specifically how his right elbow in the back just kind of really arched up. And it just, I don't know why it made such an impression on me that they were talking about like batting stances. And I knew this guy could hit. And that's the one reason I picked it. And Rico Cardi is probably somebody I've never talked about in one of my programs. So that's kind of the reason that we're doing this. Tony Conigliaro. Now, we all know, or we've heard the stories from the late 60s when he was on the Red Sox. He was beamed by Jack Hamilton of the California Angels in the eye. He was basically out like a good one full season and part of another season. And when he came back, he wasn't bad at first. I mean, this guy had, look at the back here. Tony attained 100 homers at the youngest age ever, 22. He had missed 1 year, and he already had 124 home runs. And this guy was really, I remember him because he was on the Angels. And I was actually witness, I don't know if it was his last game ever, but it was one of his last games. The Angels played the A's, and the game went into extra innings. And when I mean extra innings, it went like 20 innings. And I think Conigliaro struck out like 7 times. And he was yelling at the ump, and I honestly think he might have retired the next day. But he was Tony C. for me, he was Tony C. on the Angels. He had one really good year with the Angels, and there was a career that unfortunately ended too soon. But this is Tony Conigliaro. The last card from 1970, Rod Carew. Are you going to say Rod Carew? Yeah, Rod Carew All-Star. The reason I brought this card up was because when I was a child, I played a baseball game where I put all my cards on the floor and I played baseball with them. And if they didn't hit the ball properly in the game that we played, I would like, not tear the card, but I would like bend it and stuff like that. Rod Carew got the biggest punishment from me as a child. We're talking when I was like 6, 7 years old. And I abused that 1970 Topps card. By the way, these cards are coming out of your binder, so that's not the price of the card. These are just Ultra Pro holders here. So that is why I picked my 1970 Rod Carew card. Rod, I'm sorry I abused your card. I worked with Rod later when I interned with the Angels, and he was a very sweet man. Very stern man, but he was a good man. Now we're up to 1971. I am starting to watch baseball at this point. Naturally, I was a Dodger fan. I'm going to talk about that in a moment. This card I honestly only picked now. I did not have this as a child. Neither did my brother. This was the year my brother had cards. My brother had 1971 cards. He had 1970 cards. But I specifically remember seeing 1971s floating around the house. And I just always loved this card because of Pete Rose being in the back. And I don't know much about Chris Short. By the way, guys, I did no research on these for any of these players. So what I'm talking is completely off the top of my head. I do know, I believe Chris Short and Jim Bunning were part of like a two-man rotation in 1964 when the Phillies began their collapse the last 12 games of the season. I think him and I think Gene Mauch would only pitch bunting and short and pray that they'd win. So that's Chris Short with Pete Rose in the background. The next guy, I used to love this guy as a kid. All I could tell you was his name was Jerry. That's it. His name was Jerry, and he played for the Mets. And his name was Jerry Grody. My brother received a subscription for Sports Illustrated. And Jerry Grody was on the cover in 71 or 72. And I remember I used to, like I said, I watched the Game of the Week a lot, and the Mets were on a lot. They were one of the bigger teams back then. They had Seaver and Kuzman, Cleon Jones, those type of guys. And Jerry Grody, I always thought, even at 6, 7 years old, I kept saying, that guy Jerry, the guy that's the catcher. I know that Johnny Bench got all of the attention, but Jerry Grody also had some good years with the Mets. So loved this card. I don't know what the 1972 card looks like off the top of my head. I should have picked a card of him playing catcher, but this 71 card was too good to pass up. So that's why Jerry Grody is in here. Next, speaking of catchers, Johnny Bench. I remember my brother having this card, and I remember I would always stare for some reason at the bat here where it said number 5, and I'd say, oh, that's his number. But this was the first Johnny Bench card we had. He had, I shouldn't say we. And maybe I'll show some bench cards later down in the decade, but for now, this was the first Johnny Bench card we had. And this guy was huge at this point. 71, he was hitting home runs all over the place. And he was a damn good catcher. The next card from 1971, I am fortunate enough to remember Roberto Clemente. I do remember the 1971 World Series between the Pirates and the Orioles, and I did see Clemente play on television. And even at 6 years old, I thought he was amazing. The way he hit the ball, the way he ran, the way he defended, the way he played right field, he was just the best. And because I grew up of Latin descent, my father, I wouldn't say he disliked baseball. He was just kind of into it. But if there was a Latino player involved, he really wanted to talk about him and stuff like that. So I got to watch Roberto Clemente a lot in the late 71 and all of 72. He probably does remain probably one of my, if not, he's probably my all-time favorite player. And I'm fortunate. I never got to see him in person, but I did get to see him on TV, and that means a lot to me, just because I do have memories of him. Growing up near Los Angeles or in Los Angeles, naturally I became a Dodger fan. This guy, we called him Richie Allen. I know it says Rich Allen. This is Richie Allen, and I remember in 1971, summer of 1971, I'm 6 years old, 6.5, and the Dodgers were making a run at first place. The Giants had this guy named Juan Marshall pitching, and he was just, to me, he was the Antichrist. He hit Bill Buckner with a pitch and at Candlestick Park one series. And one day I'm going to have to make a show just on that, because I want to get, he was even on the cover of Sports Illustrated in 71, this Dodger-Giant battle that took place. Mays got hit by Bill Singer, got kicked out. And then the Giants retaliated with Bill Buckner. And it was crazy. The fights that started. I remember Hoyt Wilhelm got the last out for the Dodgers. But Richie Allen was the guy. He was the home run hitter back then. It was only 23 home runs, but it was a big deal. I just remember going to dinner with my family, and when we got to the restaurant, we went in different cars, and somebody said, Richie Allen just hit a 2-run home run. And I'm going to have to do a show one day about that year, because I don't remember much, but what I do remember made it one of my favorite years, and that was 1971. So that's Richie Allen. 1972, I'm now a little older. I'm still not buying cards, but my brother has stopped buying cards. But for some reason, I did have cards, because this Willie Mays card was, I had this card 7, 8 years old. For some reason, I had it. And this is his last card on the San Francisco Giants. I think, no, this is Series 1. By the time Series 2 came out, Mays had already been traded to the Mets. But that's it, my first Willie Mays card. This will be the one time I repeat players, and that's because it was Roberto Clemente. And this was the first Roberto Clemente card I ever owned, 72 in action. Again, I don't remember how I was picking up 1972 cards, with the exception of the cards I was buying at Jack's Ranch Market. But I remember this card religiously. I'm looking at this ad. I haven't paid attention to it in a while, but that was Roberto Clemente. Somewhere around 79 or 80, I picked up this card. I worked at a baseball card store, and the owner got a bunch of cards in, and I asked him if I was paid to sort cards. Yeah, can you imagine? That was my first job. What a cool job. I was paid to sort cards, and sometimes if I saw cards, I was sorting a bunch of cards, and there were a bunch of cards I needed, a lot of like late 60s, early 70s things, and I asked the owner if I could buy them, and he goes, "Were there any star cards in there?" And I said, "No." I think honestly there was like this, and there was a 66 Eddie Matthews. He said, yeah. So he sold them to me for like $20. And this Nolan Ryan card, I got an autographed card. I've never submitted it, and I've said this in other, I've showed this card before. Someday I'll have to submit it, but so that's Nolan Ryan's first card on the Angels. Now, when I was collecting in the late 70s, early 80s, we talked about the 1972 set a lot. My friends and I, my collector friends. And we knew now about high numbers at this point, how 1972, oh my God, what a disaster. Rod Carew was huge. The 72 Carew and the inaction cards were very expensive. So was this card locally, Steve Garvey. I did have the 71 Garvey because my brother had it. And I think for some reason, somehow I ended up with it. I sold it eventually, like in the 80s. But this is a Steve Garvey card I bought when I started collecting cards again around 10, 15 years ago. And this is card number, these Greg Morris cards here, 686. So that is my Steve Garvey card. And the last 72 card is Frank Robinson's one and only card. Loved the traded. These were cards I wasn't buying in 72, so I can't say, but looking back in 1979, 1980, talking about 1972, these cards were really hard to get. If my friend Eric's watching, who I grew up with, I think he had one of the first traded cards. He might have showed me the first one. I think he had a Jim Fregosi. I could be wrong, but that's Frank Robinson. Moving up to 73, and now I'm buying cards. April of 73, Mom gave me some money, and Rick went to the liquor store on his bike, bought some soda, bought some candy bars, and bought some baseball cards. God, I wonder if I could still do that. And in the first series, this is the card number 1 of the first series I ever owned and worked on. And this is my first Babe Ruth card. I know I made a remark a few weeks ago. I want playing day cards, so I don't count this as a Babe Ruth card. But here's Babe Ruth, Hank Aaron, and Willie Mays. Good times. And they have their stats here in the back. One of my favorite cards from 1973, Thurman Munson. I just used to love this card. Just the way Thurman's just sitting there waiting to catch the ball, but the crowd behind him is a little out of focus. Kind of looks like a 3D card. But this was one of my favorite cards from 1973, and I do remember Thurman Munson. I don't know why. I think the Dodgers were so blue, and to me the Yankees were black. They're technically, I think, dark blue. But Thurman wore the orange chest protector and the shin guards with the orange knee. And I'm always like, why aren't they all black? Little things like that bugged me back then. But this is Thurman Munson. Thurman likes to play golf. All right. Don't look at the back of Mike Torres's card that year because it said the Mike went on a diet. That's very nice. Now, in the 70s, we're going to start seeing some Oakland A's cards here because this is where they got big, where they had already won the World Championship in 72, but 73 is where we get to see the cool uniforms. And here's Gene Tennis. First time I ever heard of him was in the 1972 World Series. He ended up hitting 4 home runs that year. And he gets 2 World Series cards. He has one in Game 1. It's called Tennis, the Menace. And then this one, Tennis Singles in the Ninth. And I actually liked the A's back then. By 1974, I couldn't stand them. But in 72, I thought they were cool. And I was a big Gene Tennis fan. All right. Willie Stargell. I've heard people say that potentially could be Mike Schmidt. I don't know if that's true. I really don't. I've heard the story that he wore 17 when he first came out. I don't know if that's him or not, but that's Willie Stargell playing first base. Big home run hitter at the time. He had already hit 1 home run out of Dodger Stadium, and a year later he'd hit his second one out of Dodger Stadium. And again, this is a card my brother loved. My brother loved Willie Stargell, and I was a Stargell fan. He was just a great player. And this is my first Willie Stargell card. And the last card from 1973, Davy Concepcion. Now, some of you might say, why Davy Concepcion? I did not have a good relationship with my father, but as I mentioned to you a moment ago, he liked baseball, but he liked Latino players. And we're being from Colombia, Davy Concepcion was Venezuelan. And my father ran into him at the Biltmore Hotel in Los Angeles and got his autograph. I don't know whatever happened to that autograph. Personally, I never saw it. My brother told me about it, so maybe my brother had it and lost it. But Davy Concepcion, the longtime shortstop, he was only in his 3rd year at this point. This was a hard card to get. And I bought in the early 2000s. It took me a while to find Davy Concepcion. Good-looking card. These are the older red uniforms. They weren't wearing those anymore by 1973. They were wearing that T-shirt design that the Reds, the Cardinals, and a few other teams had. They still had the buttons here. Good card, though, Davy Concepcion. Now, in 1974, my 2nd year collecting, and I'm going to show you some cards from 74, but I might have to show you some more. To me, yes, I could show you the Hank Aaron card number 1, but this card, or the series, the subset, the Hank Aaron special, this is what introduced me to vintage cards. And I thought these were amazing. I go, oh, look at this card, look at that card. They're showing all his cards. Look at the year, it's from 1957. When I finally got a complete set of those, there are 5 of them. I was like, that was my first look at all the baseball cards. And it just brings back a lot of memories. And it's a good looking subset. Like I said, it was just phenomenal to see at that point. Jim Wynn. I call him Jimmy Wynn. I was upset when I got this card because he was on the Astros. He had just been traded to the Dodgers, and he had a big year in 1974. He hit over 30 home runs. He was on the All-Star team, and that's why I picked him, just because I was so happy he was on the team. I wish he had stayed longer, but he had health issues like the next year, and he only played 2 full seasons, but with the Dodgers. But he had a great career with the Astros. I will say that. My favorite card is Tom Seaver, Terrific Tom, or Tom Terrific, whatever you wanted to call him. This guy, those from like 69 to like those years with the Mets. With the Reds, he was okay. I mean, he was good. But with the Mets, he was phenomenal. Big-time pitcher. That's Tom Seaver. Another guy I really admired was Bobby Mercer. The Bobby Mercer that played for the Yankees. I do remember getting to see some Angel games on television where they played at the old Yankee Stadium before the first renovations in the mid-70s. and I got to see Mercer play. And a lot of my memories of guys back then are me watching on television. But I still remember watching Bobby Mercer and Roy White and Thurman Munson. The Yankees had this pitcher, Doc Medich. I liked the Yankees back then. It's so funny. Now you know me now. I'm like, but back then I liked the Yankees, and that's Bobby Mercer. Put these 74 cards down all you want. They had some nice cards. They had some nice action shots. This guy used to scare the crap out of me. John Mayberry. This was like Jose Canseco. This was a big man. Him and Lee May of the Astros. They looked like they were about to rip out of their uniforms and hit home runs everywhere. And I loved this card. And in my eyes, he was a great player. He was just, he was an okay player. But I liked John Mayberry. And I remember this guy. This was the old guy. I remember that. Al Kaline. This was like, God, that old guy from the 50s. And I did know him as a first baseman. I did have his 73 card, and he was an outfielder. But to me, we're talking about a 7, 8-year-old boy. Al Kaline looked ancient. And I met him years later when I interned for the Angels. He was an extremely nice man. And he was one of the color commentators for the Tigers. But he had a great career. And I do remember him getting 3,000 hits. I do remember that. And in 1975, he has his highlights featuring 3,000 hits. You know what? Al Kaline was the first player I ever remember getting 3,000 hits, now that we're talking about it. Okay, this guy's going to be featured at least a few more cards, but for this episode only, we can't not talk about Reggie Jackson. I should have included his 1971 card because I remember seeing it all the time. My brother had it in the house, and I remember seeing the Reggie Jackson card everywhere. But I do remember this card too, and it's a good-looking card, and he has a lot of good action shots. And Reggie was one mean hombre, that's for sure. Damn good ball player. You're going to see a pattern here. Raleigh fingers. We could tell who's about to win who three-peated in the 70s. These are the Oakland A's. Here's Raleigh fingers with his handlebar mustache. Just seemed like every time the A's got into trouble, they'd bring in Raleigh fingers and he'd save the day. Joe Rudy was my favorite player back then of the A's. Guy played great left field, batted .300, hit home runs. He signed as a free agent on the Angels and was never the same guy. I remember I was at Anaheim Stadium, right behind the Angel dugout, and he got hit in the hand, and he was out for the year, his first year with the Angels. This was like in the summer of '76. But when he was with the A's, he was one of their best players. And I think he was a great player. And the last guy, like I said, we're continuing a trend here. Jim Catfish Hunter. This was a Sunday game because on Sunday, the A's wore all white uniforms. I do remember that. And Catfish got everybody out back then. I do remember that. He was crazy. He was a great player. But that's my look at some early 70s cards. I will probably do some more episodes down the road with some other years. If you stuck around this long, thanks so much, guys. We'll talk to you next time.
It's a beautiful day for a